I have been driving the Blue Ridge Parkway for the better part of 15 years, and there is a particular kind of quiet you find up there past midnight that I have never felt anywhere else in my life. It is not silence, exactly. Silence is a thing that sits still. This is a quiet that moves. It presses up against the windows of your car like something breathing, and if you crack a window, you can hear the mountains settling around you the way an old house settles at night, with little creaks and sighs from the woods that do not seem to come from any animal you can name. I had worked a 12-hour shift at the hospital in Boone that night, a Tuesday in late September, and I was driving back down to Asheville, where I was renting a small place off Merriman Avenue. My shift had run long because of a code we lost at 11. An old man with no family left to call, and I had stayed later than I needed to because somebody had to sit with the body until the funeral home came, and that somebody ended up being me. I mention this because I want to be honest about the state I was in. When I pulled onto the parkway, I was tired, but not delirious. I was sad, but not unhinged. I had drunk 1 cup of coffee at the nurse's station before I left, and the windows of my old Subaru were cracked to keep me alert. I was not seeing things. I need you to understand that before I tell you the rest. It was somewhere past 2 in the morning when the parkway got that kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I had passed maybe 3 cars in the first hour, all of them going the other direction, and after mile marker 330 or so, I had not seen another set of headlights for a long time. My own beams were the only thing moving for miles. The road was empty in a way that felt wrong even to someone used to driving it at odd hours. The fog was thin that night, just a soft gauze in the low spots, and the moon was a bright sliver hanging somewhere above the ridgeline, cutting in and out between the pines. I had the radio turned down low, some bluegrass station out of Johnson City, and I remember the song cutting to static right around the time I first saw her. I did not think much of the static. It happens all the time up there. What I thought about was the woman walking in the middle of my lane. She was maybe 100 yards ahead of me when my headlights first caught her, and my foot came off the gas before my brain had even caught up to what I was seeing. She was walking barefoot right down the middle of the yellow line, her feet placing themselves one directly in front of the other, heel to toe, like somebody walking a tightrope. She was wearing what looked like a hospital gown, pale blue or maybe gray. It was hard to tell in the wash of my high beams. It hung loose on her and moved a little around her legs, though I did not feel any wind at all through my open window. Her hair was long and dark and hung straight down her back, unmoving too, as if it had been combed flat and told to stay there. I slowed the car to a crawl. My first thought, honest to God, was that there had been a wreck somewhere up the road, that she had gotten hurt or hit her head and had wandered off from the scene before the troopers could get to her. People do strange things in shock. I have seen it at the hospital more times than I can count. People walking out of exam rooms in their gowns, people driving home with broken arms, people smiling while they are bleeding. I thought I was looking at someone who needed help. I pulled up alongside her, slow, so as not to startle her, and I rolled my window down the rest of the way. The air coming in off the parkway was cold in a way that felt out of season. I called out to her. I asked if she was all right, if she needed a ride somewhere, if she had been in an accident. I kept my voice gentle, the way I would with a confused patient. She did not answer. She did not even turn her head. Her eyes were locked on some point far down the road, past my headlights, past everything my own eyes could see, and she just kept walking, heel to toe, at a pace that was steady and unhurried, and completely ignorant of the car idling 3 feet from her shoulder. I crept along beside her. I asked her name. I asked if she could hear me. I asked if she was cold. Nothing. Not a flinch. Not a blink. I drove alongside her for near a quarter mile like that, and I started to notice things that did not add up. The first was her feet. I kept glancing down at them as we moved together under the bright wash of my headlights, and her feet were clean. I do not mean relatively clean. I mean clean the way feet are clean when they have just come out of a bath. No dirt between the toes, no dust on the heels, no scratches or scrapes from gravel or pine needles. The parkway shoulder is chewed up with old asphalt chunks and fallen bark, and we were 18 miles from the nearest town in either direction. There was no way a person could walk even 100 yards barefoot up here without leaving some trace of it on their skin. The second thing I noticed was her gown. It was not torn. It was not wrinkled. It fell off her shoulders as smooth and pressed, as if she had just taken it out of a package. The third thing, and this is what finally made me stop asking questions, was that she was not breathing. I watched her chest. I watched it for maybe 10 full seconds as my car crept along beside her. It did not rise. It did not fall. Her lungs were as still as a photograph. I am not a man who is prone to panic. I have held pressure on sucking chest wounds. I have watched children die. But something about that still chest, that clean foot, that unmoving hair, something stacked one on top of the other in my head, and I felt a cold start in the bottom of my spine and climb up the back of my neck until it settled behind my eyes. I decided, not entirely consciously, that I was going to get ahead of her and block her path with my car. I was going to make her stop. I was going to force her to look at me, because some part of me needed her to look at me, needed to prove to myself that she could. I pressed the gas and pulled maybe 50 feet ahead of her, and I swung the Subaru crossways in the road, killed it, and sat there with my hands on the wheel and my heart hammering in my throat. I looked in my rearview mirror so I could see her approach. The road behind me was empty. No woman, no gown, no bare feet, no hair. Just empty blacktop stretching back into the dark under my red brake lights, and the trees standing still on either side like witnesses who had decided not to speak. She could not have slipped into the woods. There was no tree line close enough. The shoulder on both sides dropped off into open grass for a good 20 yards before it hit the forest. There was no ditch she could have dove into. There was nowhere. She had simply stopped being there between the time my eyes left her and the time my mirror found her again, which was no more than 2 seconds. I swear to you on my mother's grave. I sat crossways in the middle of the parkway for I do not know how long. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. My hands did not come off the wheel. I did not get out of the car. Every instinct I had was telling me not to get out of the car. I listened, with my window still down, and the parkway quiet was back, thicker than before, and I could hear the pines moving very softly against each other, somewhere off to my left in a breeze I could not feel on my skin. When I finally worked up the nerve to drive again, I did not turn my car around. I did not want to drive back through the stretch I had just come from. I straightened out and kept going south, and I did it slow, because my legs were shaking so badly I could barely keep the pedal steady. I drove with my eyes locked on the road ahead of me, and I did not look in my mirrors. I could not have told you why, at the time. It just felt important not to. 3 miles down the road, I saw the soft amber glow of a state trooper's parking lights at one of the overlooks, and I have never in my life been so happy to see law enforcement. I pulled in next to him and rolled my window down, and when he lowered his own, I could see by the dome light that he was an older man, gray mustache, hat set square on his head, the kind of trooper who has been doing this job since before I was born. I told him what I had seen. I told him about her feet. I told him about her chest not moving. I told him about the empty road in my rear view. I expected him to laugh, or to tell me I was tired, or to ask me if I had been drinking. He did none of those things. He listened. He did not write anything down. He did not reach for his radio. When I was finished, he let the silence sit between us for a long moment, and then he looked at me, and in a voice that was softer than any I would have expected from a man like him, he said that I was not the first person to tell him about her that month. I started to ask him what he meant. He held up one hand, polite but firm, and he said he was not going to discuss it further, and that I should not discuss it further either. Not with anyone, not for a while. He said I should drive straight home. He said I should not stop for anything. And then he said something that has stayed with me, word for word, for the 3 years since that night. He said, "You go on now, son, and don't you look in your mirrors again until you're off this parkway." He said it the way you would tell a child not to stick his hand in a fire. He said it like he knew. I did what he told me. I drove the rest of the way down with my rearview mirror tilted up to the ceiling of my car and my side mirrors angled out into the trees. I did not look behind me. I did not look at my own face. I kept my eyes on the road ahead and my hands tight on the wheel. And when I finally came off the parkway at the 382 exit and merged into the glow of the streetlights over Highway 74, I pulled into the first gas station I saw and sat in the parking lot and cried for 20 minutes without really knowing why. I have driven the parkway since, but only in daylight, and only when I have to. I have asked around, carefully, in the way you ask about things you do not really want answered. I have heard two other stories that sound like mine, from people who had no reason to lie. A man from Mars Hill, who saw her near mile marker 375 inches, 2019. A woman from Waynesville who saw her in 2021, closer to the Lynn Cove Viaduct. Both of them described her the same way. The gown, the hair, the clean feet. Neither of them had been warned not to look in their mirrors. The woman from Waynesville told me she looked. She told me what she saw. And I will not write it down here, because I do not want those words on a page that somebody might read out loud one night while they are driving home alone. I think about that trooper sometimes. I think about how tired his voice sounded. I think about how he must have sat at that overlook on other nights, waiting for the next one of us to come down the road shaking, needing to tell somebody. I think about how he knew to say what he said. I think about how he did not tell me what would have happened if I had looked. I think I am grateful for that. And I think, late at night, when I cannot sleep and the house gets too quiet, that there is a stretch of road up there on the spine of these mountains where something has been walking for a long time, heel to toe, in a gown that never wrinkles, waiting for somebody to stop and ask if she is all right. I think she is still walking. I think she will always be walking. And I think that if you ever find yourself out on the parkway past 2 in the morning, and your headlights catch a woman in the middle of the yellow line, you should not slow down. You should not roll down your window. You should not look at her feet. And God help you, whatever you do, you should not look in your mirrors until you are off that mountain. I drive an old Ford Ranger that I bought off a man in Lenoir back in 2014, and the one thing I can tell you about that truck is that it is loud. The exhaust has a little tick in it that I have never been able to fix, and the engine sits just loud enough that I usually ride with my radio turned up a notch higher than most folks would. I mention that because I want you to understand, before I get into any of this, that I am a man who knows the sound of an engine. I spent 14 years working at a shop in Morganton before I took the job in Linville, and there is not much about a running motor that I cannot hear from 50 feet away. What happened to me on the parkway that Tuesday night in November has been eating at me for 2 years now, and the part that has eaten at me hardest is not the lights. It is the silence. I had been up at Grandfather Mountain all day helping my cousin tear down a deer stand on a piece of land his family leases off the Parkway access road, and we had gotten a later start than either of us meant to. By the time we had the stand loaded into the bed of his truck, and I had said my goodbyes, it was near 10 o'clock at night, and I still had the whole slow crawl down the parkway to get to my place outside Marion. I remember standing in his driveway before I left, looking up at the stars above the ridge, and thinking how still the sky was. No clouds, no wind, just cold, the kind of cold that settles early in November up there, the kind that makes the inside of your nose sting when you breathe in. I zipped my jacket, climbed into the Ranger, and started down the mountain. The first hour was uneventful. I came down through Lynn Cove and past Price Park, and I passed maybe 4 or 5 vehicles going the other way, their headlights sweeping past me in that quick, lonely way that late parkway traffic has. I had a station out of Hickory playing some old country, and I had the heater going, and I was in that kind of tired contentment you get after a long day of physical work outdoors. I was not thinking about anything in particular. I was just driving. It was somewhere around mile marker 300 that I noticed the headlights behind me. I did not think anything of them at first. They came up out of a curve the way any other set of headlights would, and they settled in at a distance of maybe 40 feet off my rear bumper, and they stayed there. I will be honest and tell you that I was a little annoyed. 40 feet is too close for parkway driving, especially at night, and especially on those tight mountain curves where a deer can step out at any second. I thought about tapping my brakes to get him to back off, but I have never been the kind of man who starts trouble on the road, so I just kept driving and figured he would pass me when he found a straightaway long enough to do it safely. He did not pass me. I drove for 20 minutes with those headlights 40 feet off my bumper, and somewhere in that 20 minutes, something in the back of my brain started ticking. It was a slow, low ticking at first, the kind of uncertainty you cannot quite put a finger on. I took a curve. The lights stayed 40 feet back. I took another curve. The lights stayed 40 feet back. I came out onto one of those little straightaways you get up there, maybe a quarter mile long, and I goosed the gas a little to put some distance between us. The lights came right along with me, 40 feet off the bumper, like I had them on a tow strap. I slowed down. The lights slowed down. I slowed down more, until I was doing maybe 30 miles an hour. The lights dropped right with me, still 40 feet back. That is when I started paying real attention. I tried to make out the shape of the vehicle behind me, but the high beams were so bright and so close that I could not see anything around them. No grille, no windshield, no hood. Just two white circles of light floating in my rearview mirror, pressing into the back of my head. I leaned forward and squinted. I tilted my mirror. I tried to catch a silhouette in my side mirrors. Nothing. It was as if the lights were all there was. I know how that sounds. I know how every piece of this story sounds, but I am telling you what I saw, which is nothing behind the lights. I decided to pull over. There is a small overlook up there. I cannot tell you the exact mile marker now, but it is one of those paved half moons that the parkway puts in every few miles for folks to stop and look at the view. I hit my blinker, good and early, and I pulled off into the overlook slow, so there would be no mistaking what I was doing. I coasted to a stop with my truck facing the guardrail. The lights followed me in. They pulled into the overlook behind me, and they stopped maybe 20 feet off my tailgate. They did not pull around me. They did not park next to me. They did not angle themselves so I could see the vehicle. They just stopped, square on my bumper, pointed straight at the back of my head. The engine, if there was one, I could not hear. My own engine was idling, and I had the radio down low by then, and there was not a single other sound in that overlook. No tick, no rumble, no exhaust. Just the Ranger idling and the cold wind pushing softly against my windows. I sat there for a long time. I did not turn around in my seat. Something told me not to turn around in my seat. I watched the lights in my rear view and I waited for a door to open, for a man to get out, for somebody to walk up to my window and ask if I was lost or hurt or if I had a jack. Nothing happened. The lights burned. The cold pressed. My radio stayed on, low, playing a song I did not recognize. I waited 5 minutes by the clock on my dashboard. I kept looking at that clock because it gave me something to hold on to, something that was moving and real. When the 5 minutes were up, I put the truck in gear and I pulled back out onto the parkway, slow, giving him every chance in the world to stay parked at that overlook and let me go on my way. He pulled out right behind me. He settled back into his 40-foot distance, and we started up again down the mountain, and that was when I started praying. I had not prayed, not really, not out loud, since I was maybe 9 years old and my grandmother used to kneel beside my bed and lead me through the Our Father before sleep. I was 43 years old on the parkway that night, and I started saying the Our Father out loud, and when I got to the end of it, I started it again, and when I got to the end of that one, I started it again, and I drove for 30 miles down that mountain saying the Our Father out loud, while those two white circles of light sat 40 feet off my bumper and did not waver, did not gain, did not fall back, did not make a single sound. I want to tell you about the sound, because this is the part that keeps me awake. I had my window cracked a half inch the whole time, because the heater was running hot and the cab was getting stuffy, and cracked windows are how I have driven since I was 16 years old. And in the whole 30 miles I drove with that thing behind me, I did not hear one note of an engine that was not my own. I did not hear tires on the road. I did not hear a downshift on the curves. I did not hear the pop of a muffler, or the whistle of a belt, or the soft rushing hum that every car makes when it is moving at speed through the mountain air. There was my Ranger, ticking along under me, and there was nothing behind me, nothing but the lights. I am a man who knows the sound of an engine. I need you to remember that. The exit for Highway 40 came up at mile marker 384, and I have never in my life been so grateful to see a green sign. I hit my blinker a full half-mile early. I could feel my hands slick on the steering wheel. I could feel the inside of my jaw aching from how hard I had been clenching it. I angled into the ramp fast, faster than I should have, the Ranger drifting a little on the curve, and I held my breath. The lights did not follow me. They stayed straight on the parkway, heading south, steady as they had been for the last hour, 40 feet behind nothing at all. I watched them in my rear view as I came down the ramp, and I kept watching them as the ramp curved around and fed into the on-ramp for 40 East. And just as I merged into the bright wash of highway lights and real traffic, I looked back one last time, and the headlights were gone. Not faded, Not dimmed, not pulled over at an overlook, gone. I drove the 12 miles home to my place outside Marion, with my hands shaking on the wheel, and when I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the truck for a long time before I turned it off. I was not sure I wanted to stop hearing the ticking of my engine. I was not sure I wanted to step out into the dark of my own yard. When I finally got the courage to shut it down and go inside, I went straight to bed without turning on a single light, and I pulled the covers up over my head like a child. The next morning, I got in the Ranger to drive to work, and my radio did not come on. I thought the fuse had blown. I thought a wire had come loose. I spent a Saturday a week later pulling apart the dashboard with a flashlight and a multimeter, testing every connection I could find, and I could not find a single thing wrong with that radio. Power was getting to it. The speakers worked when I tapped them. The antenna was seated. It should have worked. It did not work. It has not worked since that night. I took it to 2 different shops, and both of them said the same thing. Nothing is broken. It just will not turn on. One of the mechanics, an older fellow out of Old Fort who has been in the business longer than I have, he took a long look at me after he tried for the 3rd time to get the radio to come on, and he said, "Real quiet, son. Where were you driving the night this happened?" I told him. He handed me my keys, and he did not charge me for the diagnostic. He walked away without saying goodbye. I have been back up the parkway since, but only in daylight and only when I have to. I do not take that stretch between Grandfather and the Highway 40 exit anymore, not for any reason. My cousin tore down the rest of his stand without me this past season. He understands. He has not said so out loud, but he understands. I think about those lights every night before I fall asleep. I think about the shape that was not there behind them. I think about the cold air coming in through my cracked window, carrying no sound of any engine but my own. I think about the overlook, and the 5 minutes on my dashboard clock, and the feeling of being looked at by something that did not need to breathe. And I think, sometimes, when I am driving late and a set of headlights pulls up behind me on a dark road, about how long it would take me to start saying the Our Father again, and whether, this time, it would be enough. I do not know what was following me down that mountain. I do not know if it is still up there, settling in 40 feet behind somebody else's bumper, waiting out their 5 minutes at an overlook, watching them pray. I do not know why it let me go at the Highway 40 exit, and I have come to believe that not knowing is the part I will carry with me the longest. My radio has not played a single song in over 2 years. Some nights, driving home in the quiet, I swear I can almost hear something underneath the ticking of my engine. Something that is not quite an engine of its own. Something that is waiting for me to turn around and look. I do not turn around and look. My wife and I had been married 9 years. The weekend we drove up to the cabin near Blowing Rock, and we had been trying for a child for 6 of those years without any luck. I say that not because it matters to what happened on the way home, exactly, but because I want you to understand the kind of state we were in that Sunday night, when we loaded our bags into the back of the Jeep and started down the mountain. We had spent 3 days in a little rented place off Flat Top Road, the kind of cabin with a stone fireplace and a tin roof that sings when the rain hits it. And we had talked, the way couples do when they have been carrying a quiet grief for a long time, about whether we were going to keep trying or whether we were going to stop. We had not decided. We rarely decided. We had just held each other on the porch in the afternoons and watched the mist come up off the valley, and by the time Sunday evening rolled around, we both felt softened in that tired way you feel after you have let yourself grieve a little out loud. We left the cabin around 10 at night, which was later than we had meant to leave. It had started raining around dusk, not hard, just a steady cold rain that turned the roads slick and the sky that deep Appalachian black that has no moon and no bottom to it. My wife, Caroline, offered to drive, but I told her to rest her eyes, and she curled up in the passenger seat with her jacket folded under her head and her knees pulled up. I pulled the Jeep onto the parkway at the US 221 entrance and started south toward Linville, where we would pick up the back way home toward Hickory. The wipers had a slow, tired rhythm that I settled into, and I had the heater on low, and Caroline fell asleep inside of 10 minutes. I let her sleep. I remember thinking how peaceful her face looked, how young she looked when her eyes were closed, and I remember the little guilty thought I had about how much I loved her and how much I wished I could give her what she wanted. And then I remember pushing that thought down the way I had learned to push it down, and I just drove. The Rough Ridge Overlook is one of those pull-offs on the parkway that you hit just past the Lynn Cove Viaduct, and on a clear day, the view out of it is one of the prettiest things you will ever see in North Carolina. On a rainy Sunday night just before midnight, it is about the loneliest place in the world. I came around the curve that feeds into it, and my headlights swept across the lot, and that is when I saw the child. He was standing at the far end of the overlook, right up against the stone and wood railing that looks out over the drop, and he could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old. He was wearing pajamas. I remember thinking that, as clear as I have ever thought anything. Pajamas. Blue ones, with some kind of pattern on them I could not make out. And his feet were bare on the wet pavement, and he was not moving. He was just standing there, small and still, staring straight out into the black valley below. I hit my brakes harder than I meant to. Caroline came awake with a little gasp beside me, and I said, "There's a kid up there." And she was fully awake in 1 second, the way only a woman who has wanted to be a mother can become fully awake. I pulled the Jeep into the overlook and parked it facing him with the headlights on. And before I had even put it in park, Caroline was already unbuckling her seatbelt and opening her door. I need to tell you what it was like outside that Jeep, because the quiet of that overlook is something I have never been able to get out of my head. The rain was falling soft, just soft enough that it made a sound like somebody whispering on every surface it touched, and the wind that sometimes comes up off that valley was not there at all, and there were no other cars, no engines, no sounds of any animals in the woods around us. It was the kind of quiet that makes the rain itself sound too loud. My headlights cut through it and lit up that little boy from behind, and his shadow stretched long and thin across the wet pavement toward us. Caroline called out to him. She used the soft voice, the one I had heard her use a dozen times on nieces and nephews and friends' children, the voice that a woman uses when she does not want to scare a little one. "Honey," she said. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Where's your mama?" She took slow steps toward him with her hands held out a little at her sides, palms open, the way you approach a dog you do not know. I was a few steps behind her with the Jeep idling. He did not turn around. He did not move. He just kept staring out over that railing into the dark, and the rain fell soft on his shoulders and on the back of his little head, and his hair was wet and stuck flat to his scalp. Caroline got to within about 10 feet of him. She crouched down so she would be closer to his level, and she said, "Sweetheart, can you look at me?" And that is when he turned his head. He did not turn his body. He did not shift his feet. He just turned his head, slow, on his neck. And I saw his face in the full wash of our headlights, and something inside my chest went cold in a way I had never felt before and have never felt since. I want to be careful here, because I know how easy it is to describe something like this and have it come out sounding like a cartoon. It was not a cartoon. It was a child's face, mostly. The skin was a child's skin. The shape was a child's shape, but the eyes were set too far apart, by maybe an inch on either side, pushed out toward his temples in a way that no human child's eyes are ever set, and his mouth did not match the rest of him. It was a little too wide, and it was pulled up at the corners in a smile that did not belong on a face that young. It was not a smile of mischief. It was not a smile of fear. It was the smile of somebody who knows something that you do not know, and is very pleased to know it. Caroline stopped walking. She told me later that her legs locked up on her, all on their own, that she did not decide to stop, that her body just refused to take the next step. She said it was like something had closed a hand around her knees and held them in place. The boy smiled wider. It stretched his whole face. And then, without a sound, without a shift of his weight, without his eyes ever leaving Caroline's, he took one step backwards, right through the railing. I saw him step through the horizontal log of that railing the way you or I would step through a curtain of smoke. His pajamas passed through the wood. His shoulder passed through the wood. His head, his smile, his too far apart eyes. And then he was behind the railing. And then he was gone. There was no sound. There was no body falling on the rocks below. There was no scream. There was no thump. There was only the rain on the pavement and the idle of our Jeep and Caroline's breath coming in short little pulls beside me. The railing had not moved. It was still solid. There was no hole in it. There was no broken board. There was nothing to show that anything had passed through it at all. except that the little boy who had been standing on the near side of it a second ago was no longer standing anywhere. I walked up to the railing. I do not remember deciding to do that. I remember my feet moving and my hand coming out to touch the wet wood, and I leaned over the edge, and I looked down into the dark of that valley. There was nothing. There was never going to be anything. The drop below Rough Ridge is a long one, and on a clear day you can see for miles. And on that night I could not see anything but black, and the soft, pale lines of rain falling into black. I called out. I shouted. I did not know what I was shouting. A name I did not have. A word. Something. The valley did not answer. Caroline was on her knees on the wet pavement by the time I turned around. She was not crying. She was not screaming. She was just on her knees with her hands flat against the ground and her eyes open very wide and her mouth moving without sound. I got her up. I got her into the Jeep. I buckled her seatbelt for her because her hands were shaking too hard to do it herself. And I got in the driver's side and I pulled out of that overlook and I drove. And I drove, and I did not stop driving until we were down off the parkway and on the state roads heading home. She did not speak for the rest of the drive. She looked straight ahead through the windshield, and she did not look at me, and she did not look at her phone, and she did not look at the radio, which I had turned off without thinking about it. When we got home around 2 in the morning, she walked into the house, sat down on the edge of our bed with her wet coat still on, and she cried for the first time, and she cried for an hour, and I held her, and neither of us said anything about what we had seen. In the morning, I called the Parkway Ranger Station. I had to call them. I could not sit with it. I spoke to a man whose voice sounded like he had worked there a long time, and I told him what we had seen, and I told him where we had seen it, and I told him about the little boy, and the pajamas, and the smile, and the railing. The ranger did not interrupt me. He did not ask questions. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "All right, sir, I appreciate you calling us." I asked him what that meant. I asked him if somebody had lost a child. I asked him if we needed to come in and make a statement. He was quiet for another long moment, and then he said, "Sir, I want to be straight with you. There is a stretch of that overlook where folks have been seeing a little boy since the 1970s. I have been taking calls like yours for 11 years. Before me, there was a ranger who took calls like yours for 20 years. Before him, there was a ranger who took them for another 15. I am sorry to tell you that the boy you saw is not a boy who has gone missing. He is a boy who has been seen." I did not know what to say to that. I asked him, and I do not know why I asked this, because the question sounds foolish even now, but I asked him if my wife had been in any danger. The ranger was quiet again, and then he said something I will never forget. He said, "Sir, your wife stopped walking when she did. That was the right thing for her to do. I am glad she stopped, and I tell you, I will not talk about what happens to the ones who keep going. I will not put that on you. You go on home and you take care of your wife. You folks do not need to come up this way again." He hung up, polite, and I sat at our kitchen table in the morning light, with my hand still on the phone, and I did not move for a long time. Caroline does not talk about what she saw in that smile. She will not talk about it. I have asked, carefully, in soft moments, and she will only shake her head and change the subject. We have been married 12 years now. We have a daughter, finally, a healthy little girl with my wife's eyes, and she is 3 years old, and Caroline watches her in a way that is not quite the way other mothers watch their children. She watches her like she is counting her features, like she is making sure, every morning, that her eyes are in the right place, and that her smile does not go too wide. We do not drive the Parkway at night anymore. We do not drive it at all, if we can help it. There is a stretch of road up there, near Rough Ridge, where something small has been standing in the dark for at least 50 years, barefoot in the rain, waiting for somebody to come close enough to look at its face. I looked. I should not have looked. I think about that smile almost every day. And I think, sometimes, when the house is quiet and my daughter is sleeping down the hall, about how long it has been standing there, and how long it is going to keep standing there. My daddy raised me to stop for people on the road, and I want you to know that up front, because if he had raised me different, maybe none of what I am about to tell you would have happened. He used to say that out here in these mountains, a car is sometimes the difference between a man getting home and a man freezing to death in a ditch, and that if you had room in your cab and the Lord had put somebody in your path, You stopped. You stopped. You did not make excuses, and you did not drive on past and tell yourself somebody else would come along. You stopped, and you took them where they needed to go, and you minded your own business about the rest of it. I carried that into my adult life without ever really thinking about it. And for 30-some years of driving these parkway roads and the little state highways that branch off of them, it never did me any harm. I helped a lot of folks. I heard a lot of stories. I never once regretted it. Not until one night in October of 2019, on my way home through Doughton Park, when I stopped for an old man in a wool coat. I had been up in Virginia helping my sister move her youngest into a dormitory at Virginia Tech, and I was driving back down through Allegheny County toward my place outside North Wilkesboro, which is a drive I have done more times than I can count. I picked up the parkway at the 229 access, just so I could take the pretty way home. It was near 11 o'clock at night by the time I came through Doughton Park, and it was freezing. I do not mean cold, I mean freezing. The temperature had dropped fast the way it sometimes does up on that ridge in October, and my dashboard was reading 29 degrees, and I had the heater turned up high and was still feeling the cold coming in through the seams of my truck doors. That is when I saw him, standing on the shoulder near the picnic area, with his back to the road and his hands in his coat pockets, looking out across the field toward the stone chimney. That is the only thing left of the Caudle cabin you can see from up there. He was not walking. He was not thumbing for a ride. He was just standing. But something about the way he was standing made me slow down. He was too still. He was not shivering, and the coat he was wearing was long and dark and wool, and it hung on his shoulders in a way that looked wrong, somehow, though I could not have told you then what was wrong about it. I pulled over onto the shoulder about 20 feet past him and rolled my window down. I called out to him. I asked if he was all right, if he needed a ride. He turned, slow, and looked at me. He was an old man, maybe 70, maybe older. His face was clean-shaven. His hair was thin and combed back. His eyes were pale and steady. He walked up to my passenger side with the careful gait of a man whose knees do not like him anymore, and he leaned down to my window and said, in a voice that was polite but quiet, "I would be much obliged if you are heading south." I told him I was heading to Wilkesboro. He said Sparta would suit him fine if I was going that way. Sparta is just a little bit off the route, but I told him I would take him. He thanked me, opened the door, and climbed in. The first thing I noticed when he got in the truck was the smell. I want to be careful about this, because I have picked up a lot of folks in my life who were down on their luck, and I know the smell of a man who has been sleeping rough. This was not that. This was not body odor, and it was not old clothes, and it was not the sour sweat of a man who has not had a bath in a while. This was dirt, wet dirt, damp earth, the kind of smell you get when you have been digging in your garden after a rain, or when you walk past a fresh grave at a cemetery. It came off of him in a soft, cold wave, and it settled into my cab, and it did not go away. I told myself he had probably been sitting on the ground. I told myself his coat was old and had picked up mildew from a closet. I did not say anything about it. You do not tell a man he smells when you are driving him home. I pulled back onto the parkway and we rode in silence for a while. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, and he looked straight ahead, and he did not fidget. I have had a lot of passengers in that truck, and every one of them, at some point, moves. They reach for their phone, they adjust the vent, they tap their foot. This man did not move. His hands stayed folded. His shoulders stayed square. His head stayed tipped forward just a little, the way an older man's head tips when he has spent his life leaning over a workbench. I tried to make small talk. It is my habit, driving strangers. I asked him if he was from Sparta originally. He said yes, he had been born there. I asked him if he had family waiting up for him. He said only his wife. His voice, when he answered, sounded like it was coming from farther away than the passenger seat. I cannot explain that any better than that. It was his voice. It was clear enough. I could hear every word. But the sound of it was placed at a distance that was not right. Like I was hearing him through a wall. Like he was at the other end of a long room and had just happened to speak softly enough that the sound still reached me. I chalked it up to my own tiredness and kept driving. About 20 minutes in, as we were coming down toward the Stone Mountain cutoff, I asked him, making conversation, what brought him out so late. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am going home to see my wife." I said, "Well, she is lucky to have you. How long have you two been married?" He said, 61 years this October." Then he went quiet, and he turned his head to the passenger window, and he stared out at the dark trees going past us, and he did not say anything else for the rest of the ride. I did not press him. I figured he was tired, or he was the quiet kind, or he had been in a fight with his wife and did not feel like talking about it. The smell of wet dirt sat heavy in my cab, and I cracked my window a half-inch despite the cold, just to get some air moving through. When we came down off the parkway and made the turn towards Sparta, I asked him where to drop him. He lifted his hand, slow and pointed. Sparta is not a big town. We were on a narrow street of small houses set back from the road, porch lights mostly off, a single dog barking somewhere a few streets over. He pointed at a little white clapboard house on the right, set back behind a low hedge, with a gravel drive and a small front porch. The house was dark, no porch light, no lamp in the window, no car in the drive. I pulled to the curb. I asked him if he had his key. He smiled, just a little, and he said, "My wife will be up." He thanked me again. He opened the door and got out. The smell of wet earth went with him, pulled out of the cab in one cold breath, and my passenger seat, where he had been sitting, felt cold for a long time after. I do not know why I sat there. I should have pulled away. I had dropped him off. I had done my good deed. I had a drive home ahead of me. But something about the house, about the dark windows, about the way he had moved when he got out of the truck, kept my foot off the gas. I sat with my truck idling at the curb, and I watched him walk up the drive. He walked slow. He walked the way an old man walks when he is tired, placing one foot carefully in front of the other. His shoulders rolled a little forward. He came up to the porch. He put his hand on the railing. He paused, just for a second, the way a man pauses before he goes inside a house he has not been in for a while. And then he faded. I want to say it again, because I know how it sounds. I do not mean he walked through the door. I do not mean he disappeared around the side. He was standing on that porch with his hand on the railing, and then his outline got soft, like a picture going dim, and then he was not there anymore. The porch was empty. The railing was empty. The old man in the wool coat and his quiet voice and his 61 years this October were gone. And the dark little house stood closed and silent in front of me, and there was nobody on the porch at all. I sat in my truck. I did not move. My hands on the steering wheel did not move. I do not know how long I sat there. A minute, 5 minutes. The engine idled, the heater hummed. The smell of wet earth, which had gone out with him, started to come back, soft, rising out of the upholstery where he had been sitting. I drove. I do not remember putting the truck in gear. I remember being on the road again, pulling into a gas station on the outskirts of Sparta because my hands were shaking too badly to drive the rest of the way home. It was one of those little country gas stations, a single pump out front and a short counter inside, fluorescent lights humming. There was a woman behind the counter, maybe 50, with gray threaded through her hair and a cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders against the cold. I did not know what to say when I came in. I stood at her counter with a bottle of water I did not really want, and I told her, plain as I could, that I had just dropped an old man off at a little white house on a street I described to her, and that something about it had shaken me, and could she tell me who lived there? I was half expecting her to tell me to mind my own business and get out of her store. I looked like a man who had seen something. I could feel it in my face. She looked at me for a long moment, then she crossed herself. I remember that clearly. Right hand, forehead, chest, shoulder to shoulder. She set down the pen she had been holding, and she said, "Sir, there is no one living in that house right now. There has not been anyone living in that house for a very long time." I asked her what she meant. She did not want to tell me, at first. I could see her working it out in her head, whether this was a story she was willing to give to a stranger. But she could see my hands, I think, and the water bottle shaking when I set it down, and she softened a little. She said, "A man used to live there, a long time ago, with his wife. He worked for the rail yard. They had been married a long time, some 60 years or so. He died in a car wreck on the Parkway in October of 1964, trying to get home from a business trip in time for their anniversary. His wife lived on in that house another 32 years after him, alone, never remarried. She passed in 1996. The house has been empty since. Nobody has the heart to tear it down, and nobody has the heart to fix it up, and so it just sits. I asked her what he looked like. I did not want to ask. I had to ask. She described him to me, an older man, wool coat, clean-shaven, combed hair, pale eyes. She said folks had seen him, over the years, here and there, on the road, always on the parkway, always in October. She said he had been seen as recently as last year by a woman who had given him a ride from the Brinegar cabin overlook, and she had not been able to tell the story without crying. I did not buy the water. I left it on the counter. I thanked the woman, and I walked out to my truck, and I drove home to Wilkesboro with both hands on the wheel and the heater on full blast, and my window cracked an inch to let the wet earth smell work its way out of my cab. It was gone by morning. The smell, I mean. I have never smelled it in that truck again. But every October, when the weather turns and the nights start getting cold, I think about that old man sitting in my passenger seat with his hands folded in his lap, staring out the window, not talking, on his way home to see his wife. I think about how long he has been trying to get there. I think about how he thanked me, polite, when I dropped him off, and how he said she would be up. I think about his voice coming from farther away than the passenger seat, and I understand now, I think, why it sounded like that. He was not speaking from where he was sitting. He was speaking from wherever he had been, all those years, waiting to make that drive home again. And I wonder, sometimes, late at night, when a car passes my house and I cannot sleep, whether his wife was up. After all, whether she had been waiting for him all those years in that dark little house in Sparta, whether, when he finally faded off of that porch, she was there on the other side of it to meet him. I hope she was. I hope to God she was. Because the alternative is that he is still out there, still walking the shoulder near Doughton Park in his old wool coat, still waiting for the next kind soul to stop for him, still trying to get home. My daddy raised me to stop for people on the road. I still stop. But now, when it is October, and when the night has that cold bite to it, and when I see a man standing alone on the shoulder of the parkway with his hands in his pockets, I slow down, and I look at his coat, and I look at his shoulders, and I check, very carefully, to see if he is moving at all. And if he is not, I drive on, and I ask the Lord to forgive me, and I hope that somewhere farther down the road, somebody kinder than me will be the one to take him home. I have been driving the Blue Ridge Parkway since I was 19 years old, which is 34 years now, and there are stretches of it I know, the way a man knows the hallways of his own house in the dark. I know where the deer cross in the fall. I know which overlooks have the good sunrise and which ones have the good sunset. I know the tunnels. There are 26 of them on the North Carolina side, give or take, depending on how you count. And I have been through every single one of them more times than I could count if I sat down with a pencil and tried. They are mostly short, most of them less than 500 feet, cut through the rock by men working for the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s and 40s. They have that particular smell of wet stone and old coal that tunnels get, and when you pass through one, your headlights bounce off the curved walls for a second and then spit you out into the dark on the other side, and most of the time, you do not even think about it. There is one tunnel in particular I want to tell you about. I am not going to tell you the name of it. Some of you will recognize it from what I describe, and that is your business, but I am not going to put the name down in plain letters. I do not want folks going out there. I do not want folks looking for it. I just want to tell you what happened to me in it. One night in late October of 2017, so that it is said out loud somewhere outside my own head, because I have not slept a full night since. It is a short tunnel, maybe 200 feet. It sits on a curving stretch of the parkway in between two overlooks, and it has a stone facade with the date carved into the keystone above the entrance, and the road inside of it is just wide enough for two cars to pass each other if they are both being careful. I had driven through it probably 200 times in my life before that night, at every hour of the day and every season. Nothing had ever happened in it. It was just a tunnel. It was part of my drive home. I was coming back from a hunting weekend up near Roaring Gap with my brother-in-law, Paul, and we had gotten on the road later than we meant to. the way you always do on the last day of a hunting trip, because there is always one more thing to pack up and one more cup of coffee to drink on the porch before you go. It was near 10:30 at night by the time I dropped Paul off at his place in Elkin and got myself back onto the parkway heading south toward my place outside Morganton. The weather was doing that thing it does in late October up on the ridge, where the air gets bone cold after the sun goes down and there is a thin mist that hangs in the low spots of the road and makes your headlights look like they have a glow around them. I had the heater on low. I had my radio set to a classic country station out of Wilkesboro, and it was playing a Merle Haggard song I had known since I was a boy. I came around the long curve that feeds into the tunnel doing about 50 miles an hour. My headlights swept the stone facade. I saw the date in the keystone for just a second, the way I always did, and I entered the tunnel. I want to be very careful about what I tell you next, because I have gone over it in my head every night for 7 years now, and I want to get the details right. I entered the tunnel at 50 miles an hour. I did not touch my brake. I did not lift my foot off the gas. I am certain of this because I remember my foot being on the gas pedal the entire time, and I remember the pressure of it, and I remember that when I came out the other side of the tunnel, I was going 15 miles an hour. I was going so slow that when a deer might have stepped out onto the road, I could have stopped for it without even straightening my arms. That is the first thing I cannot explain. My car slowed to a third of its speed inside of 200 feet of tunnel without me doing a single thing to slow it down. The second thing is what I saw in there. About halfway through the tunnel, my headlights caught something against the right-hand wall, and at first my brain did what a brain does at 50 miles an hour in a tunnel, which is to say, it tried to make sense of what it was seeing by putting it in familiar boxes. Road workers, I thought, somebody doing maintenance, a survey crew, but the shape was wrong, and the number was wrong, and then I got close enough to actually see what I was looking at, and my brain stopped trying to make sense of anything at all. There was a row of people standing against the right wall of the tunnel. I counted them later. In the long hours I could not sleep, and I settled on 9. There were 9 of them. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, flat against the stone, with maybe a foot of space between one man's arm and the next man's arm, and they were all facing out into the tunnel. They were facing me. They were dressed in work clothes, not modern work clothes. I have seen enough old photographs to recognize the style. They wore flannel shirts, most of them, some with the sleeves rolled up past their elbows. They wore suspenders over the shirts, and heavy canvas trousers. And the boots were the kind of boots that nobody makes anymore. Leather boots with the laces hooked up the front and the thick soles. A couple of them had caps, the flat caps men wore during the Depression. One of them had a red bandana tied around his neck. Their clothes were not clean. There was dust on the shoulders, and what looked like old sweat stains under the arms. And one of them had a dark patch on the side of his shirt that I did not want to look at too closely. Their faces were wrong. I want to be precise about this, because I have heard this kind of thing described 1,000 different ways in stories, and most of those ways are wrong. They were not deformed. They were not monstrous. They did not have fangs or empty eye sockets or black ooze coming out of their mouths. Their faces were just empty. That is the only word I have for it, and I know it is not a good word. It was like somebody had drawn 9 men from memory without remembering what eyes actually look like. The features were there. They had the shape of eyes. They had the shape of mouths. But there was nothing behind any of it. There was no focus. There was no life. It was the face a man has when he has been dead for a very long time, and somebody has tried to remember him. I did not scream. I want you to understand that, because I have asked myself 100 times why I did not scream. I did not speed up. I did not slam on the gas and try to shoot out the other end of that tunnel as fast as my car would take me. I felt like I could not. I felt, and I know how this sounds, like the car was not entirely mine anymore, like my foot was still on the gas, but the gas was no longer speaking to the engine. I was drifting past them at 15 miles an hour, and my hands were locked on the wheel, and my eyes were locked on the road ahead, and I was passing them one by one, and I was aware of each of them in my peripheral vision the way you are aware of a room full of people, even when you are not looking directly at any of them. And every single one of them turned their head to follow me as I went by. I did not see them turn. That is the thing that I cannot get past. I saw the first one in my peripheral vision, facing the tunnel, and then I was past him, and when I caught him again in my side mirror, his head was facing my car. He did not turn while I could see him. The movement happened in between, the second one, the same, the third, the fourth. I would see one facing forward, and then I would be past him, and when I thought to check the mirror, his head was angled toward me. 9 men, standing flat against the wall of a tunnel in work clothes from the 1930s, tracking my car with their empty faces in a motion I never once caught with my eyes. I came out the other end of the tunnel at 15 miles an hour, and for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, I just drove straight, not thinking, not feeling, just holding the wheel. The radio had stopped playing Merle Haggard. I noticed that somewhere in the back of my head, like you notice a clock has stopped ticking, what was coming out of the speakers now was a song I did not recognize. It was a slow song, with a simple melody, the kind of melody a man would hum to himself while he was working. The voice singing it was a man's voice, but it sounded, and this is the closest I can get to describing it, like it was being sung through water, like the singer was underneath a lake and I was listening from the shore. The words were muffled, the notes bent a little as they came out, and I could not make out the language. It might have been English. It might not have been. I listened to it for maybe 20 seconds before my hand went out, on its own, and turned the radio off. I pulled my car over on the shoulder about a mile past the tunnel. I put it in park. I opened my door, and I threw up on the gravel beside the parkway for what felt like a very long time. When I was done, I sat back against the side of my car with the door open and the dome light on, and I looked at my hands, and they were shaking in a way I had never seen them shake before. I sat there until the inside of my car got cold enough that I started shivering too. And then I closed the door, I put the car in gear, and I drove the rest of the way home in silence. I did not turn the radio back on. I have not turned that radio on since. The next morning, I called a woman I know who teaches at a community college in Hickory, a local historian who has written a couple of books on the CCC camps that built the parkway. I did not tell her what I had seen. I told her I was curious about the history of the tunnel. I gave her the mile marker. I asked her what she could tell me about it. She was quiet on the other end of the phone for a moment, and then she said, "Well, it has a story to it." She said the tunnel had been built by a CCC crew in the 1930s, working through a summer and a fall to blast it through the rock. She said there had been an accident during the construction, a collapse. She said she did not have the exact number in front of her, but she thought it had killed 9 men. The foreman had been trapped along with the rest of them. They had not been able to get the bodies out for several days because of the instability of the rock above the collapse. She said it had been a bad story. She said it had been written up in the papers at the time as one of the worst accidents of the whole Parkway project. She said the men had been immigrants, mostly, or local boys from families that had moved up looking for work. She said most of them had been buried in a small cemetery near the tunnel that is not marked on any map I have been able to find. I asked her, and I tried to make my voice casual, if folks ever reported seeing anything around that tunnel. She was quiet again for a long moment. Then she said, yes. She said that people had been reporting sightings in and around that tunnel for about 50 years, always in the fall, always at night, always men in old work clothes. She said that most folks who reported anything saw 1 or 2, a single figure against the wall, a pair standing at the entrance. She said that was the usual story. I told her what I had seen. I told her about the 9 of them. I told her about the empty faces and the way their heads had turned in my mirrors. I told her about the song on the radio coming out of the speakers sounding like it was being sung through water. She got very quiet. She did not say anything for a while, and then she said, in a voice that was softer than her normal voice, "I have never heard of somebody seeing all of them at once." She said, "Sir, I would be careful for a while. If I were you, I would not drive that tunnel at night again." She would not tell me why. I asked her. I pressed. She said only that in the stories her grandmother had told her about that tunnel when she was a little girl, seeing all 9 was a different thing than seeing 1 or 2. She said her grandmother had not explained what it meant, and she had never asked, and she said she was not going to start explaining it now. I have not driven that tunnel at night since. I have driven it in daylight, once, about a year after it happened, because I wanted to see it with the sun on it. I wanted to prove to myself that it was just a tunnel. I drove through it at noon on a clear day in July, and the inside was bright with the sun coming in from both ends, and there was nothing against the right-hand wall but stone, and I came out the other side at the same speed I came in, and I told myself I had put it behind me. But there is a song, sometimes, when the house is very quiet and I am trying to sleep, that I can almost hear. It is slow and simple. It sounds like something a man would hum to himself while he was working. It sounds like it is being sung through water. I do not recognize it. And I hope, with everything in me, that I never come to recognize it. Because some nights I think about those 9 men, standing flat against the tunnel wall in their old work clothes, with their empty faces and their heads that turned only when I could not see them. And I wonder if they are still waiting there. And I wonder how long they have been waiting. And I wonder what they were waiting for. And I wonder, late at night, when I cannot sleep, whether they found it in me that October evening, and whether that is the thing that is singing to me now, from somewhere, through the water. I was a long-haul trucker for 22 years before my knees gave out, and I had to take a job dispatching instead. And in all that time on the road, I will tell you honestly that I saw very little I could not explain. A lot of folks expect me to have stories. They hear truck driver, and they hear late nights, and they assume I have a whole book full of ghosts. I don't. I never did. I saw strange weather, and I saw strange people, and I saw the kind of wild animals that make you understand why our grandparents were so scared of the woods. But I never saw anything that I thought, sitting at a diner at 2 in the morning with a cup of black coffee, that I could not find some normal word for. Not until one night in April of 2011, when I was hauling a short load of lumber from Tennessee down into Morganton, and I took the Parkway south out of Linville because I was tired of the interstate, and I wanted to see the mountains before the sun came up. I want to say, before I get into this, that I was sober. I want to say that I had slept 5 hours in a truck stop motel outside of Johnson City before I started that run. I want to say that my eyes were clear and my head was on straight, and I had been driving that rig for 10 years, and I knew every creak and shudder of it the way a man knows his own voice. I am not going to spend the next 2 pages convincing you I was in my right mind. I was in my right mind. You can take it or you can leave it, but I was. It was near 3 in the morning when I came up on the Linville Falls area. My CB was quiet. My cab was warm. I had a thermos of coffee on the dashboard that had gone lukewarm, and the only sound inside the truck was the slow, wet rhythm of the tires on the Parkway and the little tick of my blinker every time I took a curve, though there was nobody there to see it. The Parkway is slow going for a rig like mine, especially on that stretch where the curves stack up on each other, and I was taking my time, riding maybe 30 miles an hour and letting the mountains come at me easy. I came around a left-hand curve, one of those long sweeping ones where the road pulls you toward the drop-off, and my headlights swept across the shoulder and out into the woods beyond the guardrail, and I saw something shining back at me from about 30 feet off the road. I let off the gas. I did not know what I was seeing yet. I thought at first that it was a reflector, the kind you see on the side of a mailbox or a driveway marker, except there were no driveways out there, and the reflection was coming from too far off the road. Then I thought it might be the eyes of an animal, a big deer, maybe. But as I coasted closer, I realized the shine was not the sharp white flash of an animal's eye. It was a soft, steady, dim yellow glow, 2 of them, about 6 feet apart, about the height that you would expect headlights to sit if you were looking at them through trees. I pulled my rig off onto the wide shoulder of the overlook just past the curve. I put on my hazards. I killed the engine, and I sat in my cab for a minute with my hands on the wheel, listening to the tick of the engine cooling and looking at those 2 little yellow glows through the trees and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A car. That was the only thing that made sense. Somebody had driven off the road, gone through the guardrail or around it, and tumbled down into the woods. The headlights were still on, which meant, maybe, that somebody was still alive in there, which meant that I needed to get out of my truck. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I keep behind my seat, the kind you could use to crack a man's skull if you had to, and I climbed down out of the cab. The air was cold. The Parkway was silent in that way. It gets that full quiet that is not silence but is something quieter than silence, the quiet of mountains that are paying attention. I walked back along the shoulder to the curve I had come around, and I stood at the edge of the drop-off, and I pointed my flashlight down into the woods. The car was maybe 30 feet down the slope, upside down, lying on its roof at an angle against the trunks of a couple of old oak trees that had probably been what stopped it, originally. It was a sedan. An old one, the kind of long, low-slung American sedan that nobody makes anymore, with chrome bumpers and a hood ornament. I could tell, even in the weak beam of my flashlight, that it had been there a long time. The body was rusted through in sheets, the paint mostly gone to a scaly brown. Leaves had piled up against the side of it in drifts. A small tree, maybe 15 years old, was growing up through where the back windshield used to be. The front tires were gone entirely, the rims rusted and sinking into the soil. This was not a fresh wreck. This was a car that had been lying in those woods for decades. And the headlights were on. Not bright, not the clean white of a modern halogen. A dim, yellow, old-fashioned glow. The kind of glow that a pair of sealed beam headlights from the 1960s would have if they were running on a tired battery. They were on. They were shining, straight down into the leaves in front of the car. Even though the car was upside down and the bulbs should have been pointing at nothing. Even though there was no possible way that any battery could have held a charge for the years that car had clearly been down there. Even though the whole car was a corpse of a car with trees growing through it. I did not yell for anyone. I don't know why I didn't yell. It was the obvious thing to do. It would have been the obvious thing to do if I had been in a different place, on a different night. Instead, I just stood there at the edge of the drop-off with my flashlight pointed down into the woods, and I looked, and I saw the shape in the driver's seat. I want to be careful here, because I know what I am about to say is going to sound like a ghost story, and I am not a ghost story kind of man. I did not see a body. I did not see a skeleton. I saw a shape. It was the shape of a person sitting upright in the driver's seat, even though the car was upside down and the seat was therefore upside down, which means what I was looking at made no physical sense. The shape was sitting as if the car were right side up. Its back was against the seat. Its head was facing forward. Its hands, or what I took to be hands, were at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel. It was not clear. It was not solid. It was a kind of density in the air. A place where the shadow inside the car got thicker and took on an outline. But it was there. It was driving. It was still driving. I called out. I cannot tell you exactly what I said. I think I said hello. I think I said, "Sir, are you all right?" I think I asked if there was anybody there. My voice sounded small out on that slope, and it disappeared into the trees without any echo coming back to me. The shape did not move. The headlights kept shining their dim yellow glow into the leaves. I took a step down the slope. I was going to go down there. Some stupid part of me, some part that had been trained for 22 years to stop and help people on the road, was going to climb down that slope and try to see if there was anyone inside. I put my foot down on the soft leaf litter and started to shift my weight. The headlights went off. Just off. Clean off. Like a switch had been thrown. The woods went black in front of me, and my flashlight, which had been plenty bright a second before, suddenly seemed a lot weaker. I froze. The headlights came back on. Same dim yellow glow. Same 2 round circles pointing straight down into the leaves. They had not flickered. They had not dimmed slowly. They had gone off and on again the way a man turns a lamp off and on. I stood there on the slope with my foot half down, and I watched. Off. On. Off. On. It was slow, and it was deliberate, and there was a pattern to it. It was not electrical. It was not a short in the wiring, because the wiring in that car had not worked in decades. It was somebody, tapping those headlights on and off. The shape in the driver's seat had not moved. Its hands were still at 10 and 2. But the headlights were going off and on like a man blinking, and I understood, the way you understand a thing without anybody having to teach you, that the shape in the car was the one doing it, and that it was doing it because of me. I turned around. I clawed my way back up that short slope to the guardrail like it was 20 feet tall instead of 6. I did not run, exactly, but I did not walk either. I got over the guardrail and back onto the parkway, and I walked as fast as my bad knees would let me walk back to my rig, and I did not turn around the whole way, and I did not point my flashlight back down into the woods. I got in my cab. I slammed the door. I locked it, which is something I had not done in maybe a year, because who locks the doors of an 18-wheeler on the parkway at 3 in the morning? I started the engine, my hands were shaking. I put my rig in gear and started to pull away. And only when I had put about 100 feet of road between me and the overlook did I finally let myself look in my side mirror. The woods were black. No glow, no car, no shape. Just the trees in the dark and the soft white wash of the parkway's white lines under my taillights. I drove the rest of the way to Morganton without stopping. I dropped my load at the mill that morning, and I went home, and I slept for 4 hours. And when I woke up, I called the Parkway Ranger Station. I told the fellow who answered what I had seen. I gave him the mile marker. I told him about the car and the headlights and the shape in the driver's seat. I did not tell him about how the headlights had blinked at me, because I did not want to hear myself say it out loud. He listened. He did not rush me. When I was done, he asked me to hold on for a minute, and I could hear him talking to someone in the background. Then he came back on and he said, "Sir, can you hold the line while I get one of our senior rangers on the phone?" A couple of minutes later, an older man came on. His voice was rough and slow and patient. He asked me to tell the story again. I told it. He listened to all of it. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Sir, I appreciate you calling. I want to tell you what I know about that curve, because you deserve to hear it." He said there had been a man who had gone off the road at that exact curve in 1967. A salesman, he thought, driving an old sedan. Nobody knew for sure what the man had been doing on the parkway at that hour, but he had missed the curve and gone through the railing and down into the woods. The search had been long and had turned up nothing. The car had not been spotted from the air because of the tree canopy. The family had given up. The case had gone cold. 11 years later, in 1978, some boys hiking off trail had found what was left of the car. By then, the trees had grown up through it, and the leaves had buried the wheels, and the body inside, what was left of it, was still strapped in the driver's seat with its hands still gripping the wheel at 10 and 2. They had never been able to say exactly how he had died. The wreck was not bad enough to have killed him outright. The ranger's theory, and he had said it was only a theory, was that the man had been pinned by the wreck in some way that was not obvious and had not been able to get out, and had sat there for some long time waiting for somebody to find him. The ranger said, "Folks see his car sometimes, sir. Always at 3 in the morning. Always at that curve. And the headlights are always the first thing they notice." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "He is not trying to hurt you, I do not think. I think he is just still trying to be seen." He said that the car had been hauled out in 1979, that the body had been given a proper burial, that none of it was still down there. There was nothing at that curve anymore. There had not been for over 30 years. He asked me, in a kind voice, if I had walked down the slope. I said I had started to. He said he was glad I had turned back. He did not explain why. I have not taken the parkway at night since. I got out of trucking altogether a few years later, and I tell myself it was my knees, and mostly it was, but there was some part of me that did not want to be on long, dark roads at 3 in the morning anymore. I think about that curve, sometimes. I think about the dim yellow glow through the trees. I think about the shape sitting upright in a seat that should have been upside down, hands at 10 and 2, still driving a car that had been dead for 40 years. I think about the headlights going off and on, slow and deliberate, like a man trying to signal a rescuer who had finally come. And I think about how I turned around and how I climbed back up that slope and how I got in my truck and drove away. And I wonder if he is still down there, in whatever way that he is down there, still waiting, still blinking, still trying to be seen. And I wonder, late at night, when I am lying awake and the house is quiet, what it must feel like to wait for somebody for that long, and to finally see a flashlight coming down the slope toward you, and to have that flashlight turn around and go back up the hill. I hope, for his sake and for mine, that the ranger was telling me the truth when he said there is nothing at that curve anymore. But I cannot help thinking, sometimes, that he said it a little too carefully, like a man who knows better, like a man who has driven past that curve himself at 3 in the morning, and who has seen what I saw, and who has told himself the same story I have been telling myself ever since. My father drove long haul for 30 years, and in all that time, he only ever told me one story that scared him. I want you to understand what that means before I go any further. My daddy was a man who had seen the country from the window of a Kenworth for most of his adult life. He had driven through blizzards in Wyoming that had killed other drivers that same night. He had been run off the road by a drunk in Louisiana and had fixed his own axle in a ditch at 2 in the morning. He had seen a man stabbed to death in a truck stop parking lot outside of Amarillo and had been the one to hold pressure on the wound until the ambulance came. He came home every few weeks smelling like diesel and black coffee, and he would sit at our kitchen table and tell my mother stories in his slow, flat voice, and most of the time he would laugh about them. He was not a man who scared easy. He was not a man who scared at all, as far as I could tell, all the years I was growing up. So when he sat me down on the back porch of our place in Newland, the summer before I got my commercial license, and he told me he had something to tell me, and his voice had a weight to it I had never heard before, I paid attention. He said it happened in August of 1986. He was hauling a load of furniture from High Point up to a warehouse outside of Wytheville, Virginia, and he had decided, against his own better judgment, to take the Parkway. He knew it was slower. He knew it was tighter. But he had been doing the interstate run for 3 weeks straight, and he wanted, just for one night, to see the mountains in the dark. He got on the Parkway somewhere around Blowing Rock and started north. The first 2 hours were easy. Clear sky, cool air, a sliver of moon. And then, somewhere around the Julian Price Park area, he drove into a fog. He said he had driven through a lot of fog in his life. He had driven through the mountain fog that the Appalachians are famous for, where the cloud comes down off the ridge at night and sits on the road like a lid on a pot. He had driven through the coastal fog down by Wilmington that is so salty you can taste it through the windshield. But this fog, he said, was different. This fog was thick in a way that was not just about water in the air. It was dense. It had weight. His high beams bounced right back at him, and his low beams disappeared into gray soup about 4 feet in front of the truck. He slowed down. He put on his hazards. He slowed down more. By the time it was full dark, he was doing 15 miles an hour with his four-ways flashing, and he still could not see the white line on the shoulder. It was near 2 in the morning. He had not passed another vehicle in either direction for over an hour. His CB was silent in the way the CB gets when there is nobody within range of you, which, he said, is a quiet you only really know if you have spent a lot of time listening to it. The only sounds in his cab were the rumble of his engine and the soft click of his wipers, because the fog was wet enough that he had to run them on intermittent. He had both hands on the wheel. He was leaning forward in his seat, and he was trying very hard not to let his mind do what a mind will do at 2 in the morning in a thick fog on a lonely road, which is to imagine things. His CB crackled. It was not the normal crackle of another driver coming into range. It was a long, slow crackle, the kind of crackle that old radios make when the signal is coming from somewhere far away and the atmosphere is against it. And then, a man's voice came out of the speaker. My daddy was very particular about how he described that voice. He said the voice was calm. He said it was slow, like the man was choosing each word carefully. He said it was not unfriendly. And then he said, and this was the part that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, even as a 16-year-old boy on our back porch in the summer sun. He said the voice did not sound right. He said it sounded like it was coming from a recording, like somebody had put their voice down on a piece of tape a very long time ago, and now that tape was being played back through speakers that were not quite working correctly. There was a faint hiss underneath it. There was a flatness to the vowels. It was a voice that had been a voice once, my daddy said, but now it was a voice that was being remembered. The voice said, "You need to pull over. There is something in the road ahead." My daddy keyed up his own CB. He asked who it was. He asked where the man was calling from. He asked what channel he was on, because channels can ghost in strange weather, and you sometimes pick up folks from 10 counties away when the conditions are right. The voice did not answer any of his questions. It just repeated itself, in that same calm and slow and wrong voice. It said, "You need to pull over. There is something in the road ahead." And then it said, "Do not look at it when you pass." My daddy told me that he sat there for maybe 3 seconds with his foot on the brake and his hand on the CB and his heart doing a thing in his chest that it had not done in 30 years of driving. And then, without really deciding to do it, he pulled his rig over onto the shoulder. He said later that he did not know why he did it. He said it was not because he believed the voice. He said it was something else. He said it was the way the voice had said the word "it." There is something in the road ahead, not somebody, not a wreck, not a deer. It. He said the word had a shape to it, that made his hands move before his brain could argue. He pulled over as far as the shoulder would let him. He killed his hazards because something in him said he did not want to be seen. He killed his running lights. He killed his headlights. He put the truck in park, and he sat there in the dark in the middle of the fog with only the faint green glow of his dashboard showing him his own hands on the wheel. The CB crackled again, very softly. The voice said, "Thank you. Stay still now. Keep your eyes on your floorboard." And then it went quiet. My daddy said he sat there with his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the floorboard of his truck for what felt like a very long time but was probably closer to 3 or 4 minutes. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear the wipers, still on intermittent, clicking softly back and forth. He could hear the low diesel idle of his engine. And outside the cab, there was that thick and heavy fog, and there was the parkway, and there was whatever the voice had told him was in the road ahead. And then he heard it. He said it started as a sound on the pavement, a slow sound, something heavy making contact with the road. But the rhythm was wrong. It was not the four-footed padding of a bear or the light-hooved clatter of a deer. It was 2 beats, 2 heavy beats, and then a pause, and then 2 heavy beats again, like a man walking. A big man, my daddy said, bigger than a man should have been. And there was a dragging sound in between the steps. Something was being pulled along the pavement. A weight, a long weight. He did not let his mind go any further than that. The footsteps got closer. My daddy said the cab of his truck started to go cold. This is the detail I want you to sit with, because this is the detail that my daddy, in all the years he told me other stories about his drives, would not let me brush past. It was August of 1986. It had been 92 degrees that afternoon in High Point, even up on the parkway at 2 in the morning in a fog. The air outside was maybe 65, and inside his cab, with the engine running, it was warmer than that. He was wearing a short-sleeved flannel, and as those footsteps came closer to his truck, the temperature inside his cab dropped, fast. He said his breath came out white in front of him, the way it does on a January morning. He said his hands on the steering wheel got stiff with cold. He said the cab windows fogged up from the inside, with his own breath condensing on the glass that had been warm a minute ago. He said it was August, and he was sitting in a walk-in freezer. He kept his eyes on the floorboard. He did not look up. He did not look at the windows. He did not look in any of his mirrors. The footsteps reached his truck. They came up along his driver's side. 2 heavy beats, a long drag. 2 heavy beats, a long drag. They did not pause at his door. They did not speed up. They came up to his truck at the pace they had been coming at, and they passed alongside his driver's side window, maybe a foot away from the glass, and they continued on past the front of his cab and off into the fog ahead of him. My daddy said, and this was the worst part for him, that when the footsteps were right beside his window, he heard something else. He heard breathing, slow, wet. A big breathing, he said, the kind of breath that comes out of something with a big chest. It was right there, right outside his window, on the other side of the fogged glass. He did not look. He swore to me, swore on my grandmother's grave, that he did not look. He stared at the floorboard of his truck with his eyes so hard, focused on a coffee stain on the mat, that he could have told you every fiber of that stain for the rest of his life. He said he felt whatever it was, pause, just for a fraction of a second right outside his window, and then it kept moving. It took maybe 20 seconds for the footsteps to fade out into the fog ahead of him. 2 beats, drag, 2 beats, drag, softer and softer, and then gone. And then, slowly, the cold began to lift. My daddy sat in his cab for a long time. He did not know how long. He was afraid to look up. He was afraid to move. He was afraid, he said, that whatever had passed him was going to come back, or that there was another one behind the first, or that looking up even once was going to break whatever thin piece of protection the voice on the CB had given him. So he sat. He sat with his eyes on the floor. He sat until his breath was not coming out white anymore. He sat until he could feel the normal August warmth creeping back into the cab. And then his CB crackled. The voice came back on, soft and calm and slow and wrong. It said, "You can go now." My daddy did not key up. He did not answer. He did not thank the voice. He did not do anything. He sat for another long stretch of time with his hands shaking on the wheel. When he finally looked up, the fog was still there, but it was thinner, and he could see the white line on the shoulder again. He started his truck rolling. He did not turn his lights back on for a long while. When he finally did, he half expected to see something in the road ahead of him. A shape, a stain, a mark in the pavement where something heavy had been dragged. He saw nothing. The road was empty. The fog was lifting. Dawn was maybe 3 hours off. He drove the rest of the way to Wytheville, with his hands on the wheel and his eyes straight ahead. He delivered his load at 7 in the morning. He stopped at a diner, and he ordered a coffee that he could not drink because his hands were still shaking. When he got home that weekend, he sat on the back porch with my mother and did not speak for a long time, and when he did speak, he did not tell her the story. He did not tell anyone, not for years. When he told me, that summer before I got my license, he had tears in his eyes. My daddy did not cry. I had not seen him cry at his own mother's funeral. He had tears in his eyes, and he took my hand, and he said, "Son, I want you to promise me something. I want you to promise me you will not drive the parkway at night. Not in a rig, not in a car, not ever. I want you to promise me." I promised him. I am ashamed to tell you that I broke that promise. I broke it last October. I had a load of lumber to run up to Pennsylvania, and I was tired, and the interstate was backed up, and I thought, it has been almost 40 years since my daddy's night in the fog, and I am a grown man, and the parkway is just a road. I do not want to tell you everything that I heard on my own drive up that night. I do not want to put it down in writing. I will tell you only that there was a fog, and that my CB crackled somewhere north of Boone, and that a man's voice came out of the speaker, calm and slow and wrong, and that it told me to pull over, and that I did, without arguing, without asking who it was, because I knew. Because my daddy, God rest him, had warned me. I sat in my cab with my eyes on the floorboard for a long time that night. The cold came, and the cold went. I heard what I heard. I did not look up. When the voice told me I could go, I went. And I understand now, sitting at my kitchen table with my hands still not quite steady, why my daddy asked me to promise what he asked me to promise. I understand why the voice on the CB always sounds like it is being played back from a recording made a very long time ago. I understand, I think, who that voice used to be, and how long he has been sitting on that frequency, warning drivers to pull over, telling them not to look. I understand that somewhere on the parkway at 2 in the morning in a thick fog, there is something that walks, and that there is somebody else who watches for it and tells the rest of us when to hide. And I understand, finally, that my daddy, in all his 30 years on the road, was not afraid of the thing that walked past his truck that night in August of 1986. He was afraid of the voice, because he had heard something in it, something I heard too, that I have not been able to put into words. Something that told him that the man behind the voice had once been a driver, like us, and that the price of that warning, whatever it was, had been a long one. I will not drive the parkway at night again. I made that promise to my daddy once. I am making it again now, to myself. And if you are reading this, and you have a long run ahead of you, and you are thinking about taking that pretty stretch of road through the mountains because the interstate is slow and the night is clear, I am asking you, as kindly as a stranger can ask, to take the interstate. Please, take the interstate. I had been driving since about 6 in the evening, when I left my apartment in Roanoke, and by midnight I was already tireder than I had any right to be. It was March of 2018, and I was 28 years old, and I had gotten the phone call that morning from my uncle telling me that my grandmother had been taken to the hospital in Asheville with another stroke, her third in 2 years, and that this one was bad, and that if I wanted to see her while she still knew me, I ought to come down. I had put in for personal leave, I had packed a bag, and I had told my boss I did not know when I would be back. Then I had sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex for almost an hour before I could make myself turn the key, because I had known, in the way you know these things, that the drive I was about to make was not going to be the drive back home. My grandmother had raised me for most of my early childhood. My mother had been very young when she had me, and there had been a stretch of years between when I was 2 and when I was almost 7 where my grandmother's little house outside Burnsville had been the only real home I had. She had been the one to teach me to tie my shoes and to read and to pray. She had been the one to sit up with me when I had nightmares. She had always smelled like rose water and baking flour and the lavender she kept in a drawer with her church clothes. She was named Elizabeth Margaret, and she had given me her full name when I was born. And my mother had signed the birth certificate Elizabeth Margaret after her, the same 3 words in the same order, so that there would always be 2 of us. My middle name, Margaret. I want you to remember that, because it matters. I picked up the Blue Ridge Parkway at the US 220 entrance, because I did not want to deal with the interstate. I wanted the slow drive. I wanted the trees. I wanted the dark curves and the overlooks and the thin moon and the chance, maybe, to work out whatever I needed to work out in my own head before I had to stand in a hospital room and see what had happened to her. I told myself I had plenty of time. I told myself I was fine to drive. I had a thermos of coffee, and I had the radio for company, and I had the road ahead of me. I told myself a lot of things. By the time I got to the stretch between Fancy Gap and Sparta, I was starting to see things at the edges of my vision. It is a thing that happens when you are tired on a long drive at night. Little flickers of motion in your peripheral that are not really there. A shape at the side of the road that turns out to be a fence post. A darker patch of road that turns out to be a shadow from the moon coming through a break in the trees. I have been driving long enough to know what the signs are, and I know that when the signs start, you stop. You pull over. You splash water on your face. You stretch your legs. You do the safe thing. I pulled into a small overlook, somewhere past Doughton Park. I had been there before, in the daytime, and I remembered it as a pretty view of the valley, though in the dark there was nothing to see but the wash of my headlights on the low stone wall at the far end of the lot. I killed the engine. I got out. The air was cold and soft and smelled like wet pine needles. I walked around the car a couple of times, swinging my arms, and I took a bottle of water out of my bag and splashed some of it on my face and the back of my neck. The cold shocked me awake a little. I breathed in slow. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the small hospital room she was probably in by now, and the machines, and the way the room would smell. I leaned against the hood of my car for a minute or two, and I let myself cry, a little. The kind of quiet crying where you know you are the only person for miles around, and you do not bother to hide it. Then I wiped my face, and I got back in the car, and I started the engine, and I pulled out of the overlook. Something was different. I noticed it within the first 100 yards of driving. The car felt heavier. I do not know how else to describe it. The suspension felt a little lower on the back. The steering felt a hair different. It was the kind of difference you feel when somebody gets in the passenger seat after riding alone for a while. A shift in weight, a settling. I was tired, and I thought about it for a moment, and I told myself it was in my head. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. There was a woman sitting in my back seat. I want to tell you exactly how I saw her, because I have gone over it in my head 1,000 times since that night, and the details have stayed as clear as if I had taken a photograph. She was middle-aged, maybe late 50s, sitting square in the middle of the back bench with her hands folded in her lap. Her hair was dark, with some gray threaded through it, parted down the middle and pulled back in the way older women in the mountains used to do. Her dress was blue, a soft, pale blue, with a small pattern on it I could not make out. It had a collar. Her hands were folded very neatly, one on top of the other, palms down on her thighs. She was looking right at me, right at my eyes, in the mirror. Her face was calm. Her expression was not sad, and it was not scared, and it was not anything I would call a smile. It was just steady. I did not scream. I have thought about this a lot over the years. I have thought about why I did not scream. I was 28 years old, and I was driving alone on a dark road at midnight, and there was a stranger in my back seat who I had not let in and who could not have gotten in while I was walking around the overlook because I had been no more than 10 feet from the car the whole time and I would have seen her. I should have screamed. I should have slammed on the brakes. I should have thrown the door open and run out into the dark. I did none of those things. I think, looking back, that some part of me understood very quickly that screaming would have been the wrong thing to do. Some older and deeper part of me that I had not met before that night knew that whatever was sitting in the back seat was not something I could scare away, and that if I tried to scare it, it would not go. It would only become something worse. so I did not scream. I kept driving. I watched her in the mirror. I did it in quick glances, because I had to keep my eyes on the road, and because I was afraid, honestly, that if I looked too long, something about her would change. But I checked often, and every time I checked, she was still there. She did not move. She did not blink. I want you to understand that. I watched her for 15 minutes, and in that 15 minutes, I never once saw her blink. Her eyes stayed on mine in the mirror. Her hands stayed folded. Her head stayed at the same angle. She was not frozen, exactly. It was not like looking at a statue. It was like looking at somebody who did not need to move, who was not doing any of the small, restless things that a living body does without thinking about it. I drove that way for a long time. I do not know exactly how long. I do not know what speed I was going. I remember the yellow lines of the parkway coming up at me and passing under my car in a slow, steady rhythm. I remember my hands on the wheel being very, very cold. And then, very softly, she spoke. She said my name. She said my full name. All 3 words of it, in the order my mother had signed them on my birth certificate. First name, middle name, which was her name, last name. She said it the way my grandmother had always said it when she was trying to get my attention when I was a little girl. Slow, soft, almost a whisper, with the same small lilt on the middle syllable, with the same warmth underneath it. I felt tears start to run down my face before I understood that I was crying. They ran hot, and they got into my mouth, and they tasted of salt and of something like the rose water and the flower and the lavender of my grandmother's house. I did not answer her. I could not have answered her. I could not have said anything at all. I just held the wheel, and I kept the car between the lines, and I drove. She did not say my name again. She did not say anything else. I drove for another few miles without looking in the mirror. I could not make myself do it. I could feel her back there. I could feel that weight in the car, that soft, settled pressure on the rear suspension, and I could feel her eyes on me in the mirror I was not looking at. I kept driving. I kept breathing slowly through my mouth because my nose had stuffed up from the crying. I kept the high beams on. I watched the road. I do not know what made me finally look again. Maybe 15 more minutes had passed. Maybe it was less. I glanced up into the mirror, and the back seat was empty. The dress was gone. The hands were gone. The dark hair with the gray in it was gone. There was only the back bench seat of my car, lit faintly by the dashboard glow, with a little fold in the upholstery that had always been there from the time I had let my nephew eat a granola bar back there. No indentation where she had been sitting. No weight in the car anymore. The suspension had come back up. The steering had gone back to normal. I had not noticed when any of it happened. I pulled over at the next overlook I came to. I put the car in park. I turned the interior light on and I turned around in my seat and I looked at the back seat, all of it, floor and bench and the footwells. There was nobody there. There was nothing there. The car smelled, faintly, of rose water. I do not know if that was real or if my mind put it there. I sat with the interior light on for a long time. Then I closed my eyes and I said, out loud, "Thank you." I do not know who I was thanking. I think I knew. I said it anyway. I drove the rest of the way to Asheville without incident. I got to my mother's house around 3 in the morning. The porch light was on. The front door was open. My mother was standing in the doorway in her robe, and her face, when she saw me, told me what I already knew. She walked out to the car before I had even gotten my bag out of the trunk. She put her arms around me and she held me there, in the yard, for a long time. And then she said, "Baby, she's gone. She passed a little before 1 this morning." She did not wake up again. Before I get to what happened after that, I want you to know something, because this part matters too. A little before 1 in the morning was the time, as close as I could figure it, that I had pulled back onto the parkway from that first overlook. It was the time that I had first felt my car get heavier. It was the time that I had looked up into my rearview mirror and seen a woman with her hair parted down the middle and a soft blue dress and her hands folded in her lap, looking at me with eyes that did not blink. I did not tell my mother that night. I did not tell her the next day either. I sat through the funeral and I hugged the aunts and I sang the hymns and I watched them lower my grandmother into the ground at the little cemetery behind her church, next to my grandfather, who had been waiting for her for 11 years. My grandmother had been buried in a blue dress. I had not known that until I saw her at the viewing. She wore blue to church every Sunday of her adult life, my aunt said. It was the color she had been married in. It was the color she had picked out, a long time ago, for the dress she wanted to be laid out in. My mother had followed her instructions. I told my mother about the drive a few weeks later, on her back porch, in the soft part of the evening when the birds were just starting to quiet down. I told her everything, the wait in the car, the woman in the mirror, the folded hands, the dress, the voice saying my name, the empty back seat. My mother did not look at me the whole time I was talking. She looked out across her yard at the edge of the woods. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, very quietly, "That sounds like her. That sounds just like her." We sat on the porch until it got dark. I have not taken the parkway at night since. It has been almost 8 years. I do not think I am afraid of what I saw. I think that is the part of this that is hardest for me to explain to other people and to myself. I am not afraid of her. I do not think she meant me any harm. I think she had just one stop to make on her way out of this world. One small thing to do. One girl to come see before she went. And I think the parkway that night gave her the road she needed to do it. I think she got in at the overlook where I had splashed water on my face, because that was as close to me as she could get without scaring me. And I think she rode with me for 15 minutes because she wanted to look at me one more time. And I think she said my name because it was her name too, and because she wanted me to know that she was going. The part of this that has stayed with me, the part that settles on my chest some nights when the house is quiet and I cannot sleep, is not fear. It is the soft, bottomless sorrow of knowing that she took the trouble to come to me, that she did not go straight to wherever she was going, that she spent the last 15 minutes of her journey sitting in the back seat of my car, watching my face in the mirror, so that she could say my name one more time before she let go of it. I have done a lot of driving in the years since. I do not drive the parkway at night anymore, but sometimes, on other roads, at other hours, I will feel a small shift in the weight of my car, a soft settling in the back, and I will not look in the mirror. Not because I am afraid of what I would see, but because I am afraid of what I would not see. Because I am not sure I could bear to find out that she is not there. And I am not sure, either, that I could bear to find out that she is. I want to be careful about how I tell this story, because I still do not fully believe it myself, and I was the one it happened to. I have told it to exactly 3 people in the 7 years since that night, and each time I have told it, I have noticed that my voice gets quieter without my meaning it to, and that I find myself looking over my shoulder at nothing, and that I want, very badly, to stop talking before I get to the end. I am going to try to tell it here, all the way through, because I think there is something in me that needs it to be out in the world and not just in my own head. But I am going to ask you, if you will, not to say the word I am going to avoid saying when you hear this story. I am going to ask you to leave it alone. You will understand why by the time I am done. It was the first Saturday in October of 2018, and I had been at a wedding in Waynesville for one of my oldest friends from college. His bride was a sweet girl from Charleston who had wanted a mountain wedding, and they had rented a lodge up off the Blue Ridge Parkway for the ceremony and the reception. It was a good wedding. I do not say that lightly. I have been to a lot of weddings. This one was small and warm, and the father of the bride cried when he gave his speech. And there was a bluegrass band that played until 10 o'clock, and I had eaten more than I meant to, and laughed more than I had laughed in years. I had not been drinking. I want to say that up front. I had driven up that morning from Charlotte, where my wife and I had been living for about 3 years, and I had made the decision on the drive up to stay sober through the whole thing, because I did not want to pay for a hotel, and I did not want to sleep on anyone's couch, and I had a quiet Sunday planned at home with my wife that I wanted to get back to. I had drunk 2 ginger ales at the reception. That was it. When I got in my car in the lodge parking lot a little before 11, I was as clear-headed as I ever am. I had eaten a full meal. I was rested from a lazy morning. I had a thermos of coffee for the drive. I was not running on fumes. I was not running on anything that would have set me up to see what I am about to tell you I saw. The lodge sat just a few minutes from the parkway, and I got on it heading south because that was the prettiest way down toward the interstate at Asheville. The night was clear. The moon was close to full. The parkway was quiet. The way it gets on a Saturday night that late, when the day trippers have all gone home, and the tourists have gone back to their hotels and there is nothing out there but the long black road and the trees on both sides, and the occasional set of taillights far ahead of you that you never quite catch up to. I was somewhere around mile marker 412, which, if you know the parkway, puts me in the stretch between Soko Gap and Water Rock Knob, on that long, curving descent where the road drops down through stands of oak and birch, and the shoulder narrows enough that you do not want to stop unless you have to. I had been driving for maybe 20 minutes. I had the radio turned low, playing an old gospel station I sometimes listened to on long drives, because the harmonies kept me awake better than anything else. I had both hands on the wheel. I was paying attention. A deer stepped into the road ahead of me. It was not dramatic. It was not one of those deer that jumps out at you from a shoulder and gives you a half second to brake. She came walking out from my left, calm, head down, a small doe, maybe a year or so old. The kind of deer you see 10 of a night on those roads if you are paying attention. I lifted off the gas and started tapping my brake, smooth, because I had plenty of distance to stop. She walked out into the middle of my lane, about 40 feet in front of my bumper, and she stopped there, and she turned her head and looked at my headlights. I came to a full stop. I did not honk. I did not flash my lights. You do not do that with deer. You wait. You let them finish whatever it is they are doing. It can take them a minute, sometimes, to decide which way to go, and the worst thing you can do is startle them back into your lane. So I sat there with my foot on the brake, idling, the radio still low, and I watched her. She was a normal deer. I want to put that down clearly, because everything about the next 30 seconds was not normal, and I want you to understand that up until those 30 seconds, I was looking at a normal deer on a normal road at a normal hour. She had the right proportions. She had the right coloring. Her eyes reflected my headlights, the right shade of pale green. She had the little white under her tail. She was a doe. She was a deer. That is what I was looking at. And then she stood up. Her front legs came up off the pavement. That was the first thing I saw. It was not a quick motion. It was not a startled rear up the way a deer will sometimes push off its front legs when a car gets too close. Her front hooves lifted off the road at the same time, smooth and steady, and she rose onto her back legs the way a person rises when they have been sitting on the floor and they decide to stand up. Her back legs straightened out under her. Her spine, which had been angled forward the way a deer's spine is always angled forward, shifted upright. Her chest came up. Her front legs came in toward her body and hung there, loose, at her sides, about where a person's arms would be. And she balanced, standing, on her two back legs, in the middle of the road, looking at me. She was about 5 feet tall. I can tell you that because I could see her over the hood of my car. My car is a mid-sized sedan. The top of her head, from my seat, was above the height of my hood but below the top of my windshield. She was on two legs, standing up, balanced. Still a deer from the neck up. Still a doe's head. Still those big soft ears. Still those pale green reflective eyes. But standing, I did not scream. I do not think I made any sound at all. I sat in the driver's seat with my foot on the brake and my hands on the wheel, and I stared at her and she stared at me. My mind was not working the way a mind is supposed to work. My mind had encountered something it had no category for, and it had simply stopped trying. I was not thinking. I was only looking. She stood there for what was probably less than 10 seconds but felt like much longer. She looked at me. I looked at her. Her head tilted, just a little, to the right. She did not blink. I did not hear her breathe, though the distance between us was short enough that on a quiet night I should have heard something. And then she turned, smoothly, on her back legs, and she walked off the road. This is the part I have the most trouble with. Even now, 7 years later, she walked on her back legs. The deer's back legs are not built to walk like a person walks. A deer's leg joint bends the wrong way for that. I know this. Every hunter knows this. When you shoot a deer and she falls, her legs fold backward. But this deer, this thing, walked across the remaining width of the road and onto the shoulder on her own two back legs, and her gait was not the wrong need, jerky motion I would have expected from an animal trying to stand like a person. Her gait was smooth. It was too smooth. It was the smooth, balanced, hip-driven walk of a person who has been walking that way their whole life. Her front legs swung a little at her sides, A little, the way a person's arms swing when they walk. Her head stayed level. She did not look back at me. She walked off the edge of the shoulder, into the grass, and across the grass, and into the tree line, and she was gone. And I sat in my car in the middle of the parkway for a long time. The radio was still on. An old hymn was playing. I can remember the melody, faintly, though I could not tell you the words. My foot was still on the brake. My high beams were still pointed into the empty road ahead of me. There was nothing there anymore. There was no deer. There was no anything. There was only the pavement and the shoulder and the dark line of the trees where she had walked in. I did not get out of my car. I want you to understand that I did not get out of my car. I did not roll down my window. I did not turn off the radio. I did not call out. I did not reach for my phone. Every instinct I had was telling me to stay exactly where I was, to not make any sound, to not signal in any way to the trees that I was still there. I sat like that, by my later estimate, for about 3 minutes. It felt like an hour. And then, still without getting out, still without rolling down my window, still without saying a single word out loud, I took my foot off the brake and I started driving again. I drove the rest of the way down the parkway slowly. I kept my eyes on the road. I did not look into the trees. I did not look in my rearview mirror for a long time. When I finally did, somewhere near Asheville, I checked it just for an instant and then I looked away, because I was afraid, though I could not have told you then exactly what I was afraid of. I got home to Charlotte a little after 2 in the morning. My wife was asleep. I did not wake her. I pulled into our driveway, and I put the car in park, and I turned the engine off, and I sat there, and I cried. I cried for reasons I could not name. I had not been hurt. Nothing had chased me. Nothing had touched me. But I cried for maybe 15 minutes in the dark of my own driveway, sitting in a car that still held faintly, I thought. The cold that had come in through the vents up on that mountain, and when I was done, I went inside and I went to bed, and I did not sleep for a long time. In the days after, I did something I probably should not have done. I looked it up. I spent a week reading everything I could find about the mountains of western North Carolina, about the folklore of the Cherokee people who had lived in those mountains for thousands of years before anyone else, about the old stories from up around the Soco Gap area. I did not find the story on any of the first pages I read. I had to go deeper. I had to read articles by folklorists, and transcripts of interviews with elders, and old books that had been scanned onto library websites that felt like they had not been updated in 10 years. And in those places I found what I had seen. Not exactly. Never exactly. The stories varied, but the shape of it was there. There are things, in old Cherokee folklore, that wear the shapes of deer, but are not deer. I am not going to write the name of the thing down on this page, because every source I found that took the thing seriously was careful about how its name was used. And I am going to be careful too. The stories agreed on a few things. The thing moves between shapes. The thing is older than the people who first named it. The thing should not be spoken to. The thing should not be followed. And this was the part that stopped me cold in my seat and made me close my laptop for the rest of the night. The thing should not be told about, should not be named, should not be described out loud while you are still on the mountain that it calls its own. I waited until I was back in Charlotte, inside my own house, with the doors locked and my wife sitting beside me on the couch, before I said a single word about it. I told her everything. I told her about the deer stepping out into the road, and about how she had stood up, and about her front legs hanging at her sides, and about the smooth, wrong gait as she walked into the tree line. I told her about the Cherokee stories. I told her I thought I had seen something I was not supposed to have seen. And I told her I was grateful, in a way I could not quite articulate, that I had not spoken to it, that I had not rolled down my window, that I had not gotten out of my car. My wife listened to all of it. She did not interrupt me. She did not tell me I was being foolish. She is a serious woman, and she has a respect for the old stories that her grandmother passed down to her. And when I was done, she held my hand, and she said, in a quiet voice, that she was glad I had not followed it. She said she was glad I had driven away. And she asked me, very gently, not to tell the story to anyone else for a good long while, and not to say the word out loud, and not to go back on the parkway for a while. I agreed. I have mostly kept to that. It has been 7 years. I have been up on the parkway maybe 3 times since, always in the daytime, never past Asheville. I have never again driven the stretch near mile marker 412. I do not hunt anymore, though I used to, and I do not go camping, and my wife and I vacation somewhere other than the mountains when we take a long weekend. I am writing this down today because I am 41 years old now, and I have a daughter, and she is 5. And yesterday she asked me why we never go to the mountains like her friends do. I told her some families just do not. I did not tell her the rest. I do not know what I saw that night. I have told you I do not fully believe it myself, and that is true. I have spent 7 years trying to find a way to explain it to myself that lets me keep driving and keep working and keep raising my daughter without a small cold place in my chest that opens up every time the season turns to October. I have not found that explanation. I do not think I am going to. I will tell you only this, and then I will stop. I did not get out of my car. I did not roll down my window. I did not speak to her. I did not follow her into the trees. And I did not until I was safely back in my own home, off the mountain, in the bright kitchen light of my own marriage, say anything about her out loud. I hope, whoever is reading this, that if you are ever driving down that stretch of the parkway at night and a deer steps into your headlights, and something about the way she looks at you feels too steady, and she begins to lift her front legs off the pavement, that you will do the same thing I did. I hope you will not speak. I hope you will not follow. I hope you will sit very still in your car for as long as it takes her to walk back into the trees. And I hope, most of all, that you will drive home and hold the people you love and leave her, whatever she is, on her mountain. Because I think she was there a long time before us, and I think she will be there a long time after. This was 3 weeks ago. I am telling this story now because I still do not know what else to do with it, and every night since, I have been turning it over in my head, looking at it from different angles, trying to find a way to put it down that makes it smaller than it is. I have not found that way yet, so I am going to write it out the way it happened, from start to finish, and I am going to let it be what it is, and maybe that will be enough. I had a job interview in Roanoke, Virginia, at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning. It was for a position I had been trying to get for almost 2 years, the kind of job you do not get a second chance at, and I had been preparing for this interview for 6 weeks. I live outside of Morganton, North Carolina, which puts me about 4 hours from Roanoke if the interstate is clean. I knew that Thursday morning traffic around the Winston-Salem area and the Greensboro area was going to be bad by 7, so I made the decision the night before to leave at 3 in the morning. I figured I would get there by 7, find a quiet breakfast spot, go over my notes one more time, and walk into the interview calm and early. I got on the road at 3 sharp. I had coffee in a travel mug, and I had a black garment bag hanging on the hook in my back seat with my suit in it, and I had a folder of notes in my passenger seat, and I was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt because I was going to change into the suit at a gas station outside of Roanoke. I want you to know all of this in detail because every part of it, every small practical thing about that morning is still real in my head. I did not dream this. I was not in some altered state. I was a man driving to a job interview, doing the kind of careful planning that men do when they need a job badly. I decided to take the Parkway. I want to explain why, because I have thought about this a lot in the weeks since, and I do not know if the Parkway chose me or if I chose the Parkway. The interstate would have been faster, by at least 30 minutes. But I had been up and down Interstate 77 more times than I could count, and I had been up and down Interstate 81 almost as many times. And I knew that in the dark, early hours of the morning, the truck traffic on those roads would be brutal. The Parkway would be slower, but it would be empty. I would be able to think. I would be able to listen to my podcast. I would be able to arrive at my interview in a good state of mind. That was the reasoning. That was all the reasoning. I got on the Parkway near Marion, at the North Cove entrance, a little before 4 in the morning. The sky was full dark. The moon had set. The road was empty in the way it is always empty on the Parkway at that hour, which is to say more empty than any road anywhere else. I settled in at 50 miles an hour, which is the most the Parkway curves will let you do safely, and I started north. I was somewhere around mile marker 330, about 10 miles in, When I saw the first sign, it came up on my right, just past a curve. My headlights swept over it, and I caught it for only a couple of seconds, and then I was past it. But I saw it clearly enough. It was a wooden sign, 4x4 posts, with a horizontal wooden plank across the top, the way the old parkway signs used to be built before they replaced most of them with the modern green metal ones. The lettering on the sign was hand-painted, white paint on brown wood. Block letters, a little uneven, like somebody had done them with a steady hand but not a professional's hand. Last exit before dawn. That was all it said. No route number, no mile marker, no distance. Just those 4 words, painted in those slightly uneven letters, above a narrow ramp that curved off to the right and disappeared into the trees. I kept driving. I did not slow down. My brain, honestly, did not quite process what I had seen. The parkway has a lot of exits, and the names of them are sometimes strange, and I am not a man who knows every single one of them from memory. I thought, in a vague way, that I had seen a sign I had not noticed before on previous drives. I made a mental note to look it up when I got to Virginia. I drove on. 10 minutes later, I saw the sign again. Same sign, same 4x4 posts, same brown wood, same hand-painted white letters. Last exit before dawn. Same narrow ramp curving off to the right and disappearing into the same kind of trees. I slowed down this time. I told myself I must have gotten the mile markers confused on the first one, that I was disoriented, that the parkway had more exits than I remembered in that stretch. But the ramp was in a different place. The trees around it were a different shape. It was a different exit. It just had the same sign, and the same 4 words, and the same hand-painted lettering, and it curved off into the same dark. I did not take the exit. I want to tell you now, before I go any further, that every instinct I had, from the moment I saw that second sign, was telling me not to take the exit. I cannot explain that. There was nothing threatening about the sign. It was just words on wood, but my stomach had tightened, and my hands on the wheel had gone cold. And there was a small, quiet voice in the back of my head that was saying, very clearly, keep driving, do not take the exit. I kept driving. I turned my podcast up a little louder. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was seeing things. I told myself the interview was getting to me, that my brain was playing tricks on me, that I would get to Roanoke and I would laugh about this in a week. 10 minutes after that, I saw the third sign. Last exit before dawn. This time, there was a car coming up the ramp. It was an older sedan, maybe from the 90s, and its headlights were on. I remember noting, as I watched it merge onto the parkway in front of me, that the headlights were the old-fashioned yellow kind, dimmer than modern headlights, the kind that used to be standard before everyone went to halogen and LED. I could not see the driver clearly through the back windshield. I could see only the shape of a person, one person, sitting at the wheel. The car merged in about 100 feet ahead of me, and it pulled out into my lane at a steady pace, and it accelerated up to maybe 45 miles an hour, and it drove in front of me. I slowed down to let it stay ahead of me. I did not want to pass it. I did not want to be anywhere near it. I followed it at a distance for about a mile, and then the car took the next exit. The next exit was also a hand-painted wooden sign that said, "Last exit before dawn." The car merged onto the ramp, its old yellow taillights glowing, and it curved away down into the trees and was gone. I pulled over. I did not think about it. I pulled off onto the next little wide shoulder I came to, which was maybe half a mile past where the car had exited. And I put my car in park, and I sat there with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The parkway around me was absolutely quiet. My headlights cut out into the dark in front of me. My podcast was still playing, some man talking in a calm voice about something that I could not follow, and I reached over and I turned it off. The silence when the podcast stopped was very deep. I picked up my phone. No signal, 0 bars. I was used to the parkway eating my signal in patches, but this was the full no service reading, the kind you get when you are somewhere truly remote. I looked at the clock on my phone. 4:04. I had gotten on the parkway just before 4. I checked the clock on my dashboard. 4:04. They agreed. I sat and I tried to breathe slow. I told myself that I had seen 3 similar signs in a short stretch, that the parkway service had probably put them up for some kind of event, that the car in front of me had been driven by somebody who knew the road better than I did, that everything was fine. I said these things to myself, but I did not believe any of them, because the back of my neck was cold and my hands were still shaking, and there was a taste in my mouth that I had never tasted before, that I can only describe as a kind of wet mineral cold, the taste of a deep well, the taste of the inside of a cave. I waited. I told myself I was going to wait 10 minutes. I was going to wait 10 minutes, and when those 10 minutes were up, if the parkway still felt wrong, I was going to turn around and go back the way I had come, and I was going to take the interstate, and I was going to be late for my interview and deal with that when I got to it. I watched the clock on my dashboard, 4:04, 4:04, 4:04. The clock did not move. I watched it for what I knew, by counting in my own head, was at least 5 minutes. The clock stayed at 4:04. I looked at the clock on my phone, also 4:04. I looked out the windshield at the dark parkway. I looked in my rearview mirror at the dark parkway. Nothing was moving. No cars were passing me. No sounds were coming from outside. My engine was idling, but the sound of it had taken on a quality I can only describe as muffled, like I was hearing it from under a thick blanket. I counted to 60 in my head, slow, the way my grandmother had taught me to count to calm myself down when I was little. I did it 4 times, 4 minutes, by my count. Then I checked the clock. 4:04. I want to tell you now what I did not do. I did not get out of my car. I did not open my door. I did not roll down my window. Something very old in me, something from somewhere far below my thinking mind, was telling me that if I opened the car, the air outside would not be the air I had driven in on. It would be something else. I do not know how I knew this. I just knew it. I sat with my hands on the wheel, and my seatbelt still on, and my doors locked, and I waited. I waited, by my own count, about 20 minutes. The dashboard clock did not move. The phone clock did not move. My wristwatch, which I looked at only once, did not move. Time was sitting, outside my car, on that stretch of parkway, like a bird that had landed and decided not to fly. And then, all at once, it came back. The first thing I noticed was the sky. I had been looking at the dashboard clock, and something in my peripheral vision made me look up, and the sky past my windshield was not full dark anymore. There was a soft gray in it. The edges of the trees had started to take on a shape. The parkway ahead of me was no longer a black tunnel but a dim gray ribbon. Dawn was coming. Dawn was coming fast. I had seen dawns on the parkway before, and they did not move like this. They crept up. They came slow. This one arrived the way you wake up from a deep sleep, the gray brightening into blue in a way I could watch happening. And the clock on my dashboard jumped. It did not tick forward. It did not count up through the minutes. It jumped from 4:04 to 5:47 in one visible flicker. My phone clock did the same thing. My wristwatch, when I looked at it, read 5:47. 1 hour and 43 minutes had passed, and I had not felt any of them pass. But they were gone. They had happened. The sky said so. The clock said so. The birds, which I could now hear starting up in the trees outside, said so. I drove on. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I drove north on the parkway, with my hands tight on the wheel and my breath coming short. And as the light came up around me, the trees became just trees, and the road became just a road, and I came to an exit sign, a normal green metal one, that told me I was 3 miles from the US 460 turnoff toward Roanoke. I took that turnoff. I got on the interstate. I pulled into a gas station in Salem, Virginia, at 6:40 in the morning. I went into the bathroom, and I changed into my suit, and I splashed water on my face, and I did not look at myself in the mirror for long because I did not want to see what my face looked like. I made it to my interview at 8:45. I sat in the parking lot and I did the breathing exercises a therapist had taught me once for panic attacks. I went in. I interviewed. I do not know how. I do not remember most of it. The man who interviewed me was kind and thorough and professional, and he asked me thoughtful questions, and I must have given him thoughtful answers, because he called me 3 days later and offered me the job. I took the job. I start in January. I am moving to Roanoke next month. I have not driven the parkway since. I do not plan to drive it again. I have spent a lot of time in the 3 weeks since that night reading about that stretch of road about the strange reports that people have filed over the years, about the stretches where truckers say their clocks go wrong, about the letters people have written to historical societies describing hours they cannot account for, about the Cherokee stories of places in these mountains where the old world and the new world do not quite line up. I do not know what to make of any of it. I only know that my dashboard clock sat at 4:04 for something that was longer than 4 minutes and shorter than an hour and a half, and that I watched it happen, and that I do not have an explanation for it that makes me feel any better. The thing I think about most, the thing I have not been able to put down, is the car. The other car, the old yellow headlamp sedan that came up the ramp off of one last exit before dawn, drove a mile in front of me, and then took the next last exit before dawn back off the parkway. Somebody was driving that car. One person. I could see the shape. I think, sometimes, late at night, when I am trying to sleep, about that person. I think about what the inside of their car looked like at 4:04 in the morning. I think about whether their clock was moving. I think about whether they knew what the signs meant. I think about whether they had been driving between those two exits for a very long time, looking for the right one. I hope they found it. I hope whatever last exit before dawn they were meant to take, they found it, and they got off the parkway before the dawn came, and they went wherever it was they were supposed to go. I hope so, because the alternative, which I cannot stop turning over in my head, is that they are still on that road, driving from one sign to the next, looking for an exit that is never quite the right one, watching their clock sit at 4:04, while the rest of the world with the interstate and the gas stations and the job interviews, goes on without them. I do not know who was in that car. I hope they found their exit. And I hope, whatever you take from this story, that if you are ever driving the parkway in the hour before dawn and you see a wooden sign you have never seen before, with 4 words hand-painted on it in slightly uneven white letters, you will keep driving. You will not slow down. You will not take the ramp. You will keep your eyes on the road ahead, and you will pray, if you pray, and you will wait for the real dawn. The real dawn always comes. The other one, I think, only comes for some of us.